The Russian hybrid threat, brainwashed cultists, anti-Semites, security threat and sexual orgies. Fanatics acting like suicide bombers from groups such as ISIS. You publicly lynch innocent people based on lies and unfounded claims. Now tell us, what should we say to our children when they come across these disgusting articles? When their classmates suddenly start avoiding or insulting them? Or what if it escalates to physical confrontations and harm? What then? Who will be responsible for the mental and physical abuse of children? If the lynching of an innocent group of people becomes the norm in society, it's only a matter of time before you and your children are the next targets. You don't believe it? Do you think it will be limited to just slanderous articles? This kind of incitement to hatred leads to persecution and, ultimately, to the genocide of innocents. Once a precedent against the defenseless and innocent is set, nothing will stop them from treating you the same way next time. This isn't just history from the Nazi actions against the Jews. In some countries, the story we're sharing with you today is a brutal reality of everyday life.
People decided to study the Bible thoroughly, and this is what happened to them. I won't disclose their real names. This was an ordinary family, a husband, a wife, and 2 kids. Let's call them Ivan and Sarah. They had good jobs, friends, and hobbies. They never broke the law. Their children attended elementary school and after-school activities. The girl was 8, and the little boy was 6. They were a family just like any other. Once a week, they'd meet with like-minded people for religious gatherings, discussing matters of faith and reading the Bible. In those moments, they were truly happy. But after a while, strange things began to happen. One day, the children saw their mother watching the news on TV. With tears in her eyes, she said to her husband, "How can anyone believe such lies? We're people just like everyone else. Our president said we're all equal before the law, so why are they saying such things about us?" The problem was that someone in the media had begun to smear them. At first, they were accused of being foreign agents and a criminal group. Then the allegations got worse, with claims they were abusing innocent children and committing self-immolation. Interestingly, these articles first appeared on dubious forums, where the information couldn't be verified anywhere. Then the country's leading media outlets started referencing those same forums. Even and Sarah had only committed one offense. They believed in God differently than the Russian Orthodox Church. The number of such articles kept increasing, and the media labeled these believers as a terrible cult. People around them believed these lies. This family faced societal intolerance, and even their friends started to avoid them. Their children began to be bullied at school, and parents of other children demanded they be expelled. One night, someone threw a Molotov cocktail through their window. It landed in the children's room. A few weeks later, Ivan lost his job because, according to his bosses, people like them don't belong in this company. All of this was the result of deliberate lies in the media, but it didn't stop there. The worst part came when law enforcement showed up and arrested the parents. Then, Child Protective Services arrived and took their kids to a foster home. Those who publish these lies in the media are called anti-cultists. And by pure coincidence, the foster home where the children were sent was run by those same anti-cultists.
This story goes on, and you can find the full version at actfiles.org. The next few days felt like a fog for the children. A large house, lots of other kids, and strange adults. From the very first day in the orphanage, they had a strange, inexplicable feeling, a feeling so bright, yet beyond children's understanding, that they had been discarded like broken things, and no one needed them anymore. Their lives did not belong to them anymore, but to these adult strangers. And they were completely at their mercy, and the lack of mercy. They had no personal space, and their boundaries were constantly violated in a rough way. Life in the orphanage turned into a real hell for the children. They were the children of cultists, which meant that they were called children of criminals, children of terrorists, subhuman, and so on. The carers, driven by hatred to everyone, labeled by the agents of the anti-cult, mocked the children, beat them, and instilled in them the conviction that they were not worthy of life, that their parents were not humans, and therefore they were not humans either. They were the children of cultists, little brainwashed cultists with innate depravity. In addition to physical abuse, children were also sexually abused. A small 8-year-old girl, sinful and unworthy, was forced to recite prayers while being raped. This way, they cast out the demon of cultism.
Their nightmare continued. Children were divided and sold as commodities, sold by those who imprisoned their mother and father, sold by those who fought tirelessly against cults, and for whom these children were subhuman, much like their parents. Children of cultists, who are they in the eyes of society? Who are they in the eyes of all of us? Arriving at a new place, a confused 8-year-old girl saw other girls like her. Some were older, others younger. Another orphanage, she thought, carefully watching the people in long dark dresses. Maybe they won't beat me. But this was not an orphanage. It was a place where rich individuals came to buy little girls for a fat sum of money for a certain time. It was a paradise for pedophiles and perverts, monsters without heart and soul, without morality and humanity, willing to pay any price for goods in order to make up for this purchase by perverted satisfaction of their animal instincts and lowest desires. For them, these children were purchased goods. The owners of these enterprises, they were a source of income. This 8-year-old girl was no longer seen as human. She was expected to earn back the money they'd paid for her, which meant on average being exploited around 10 times a day. It's scary to imagine feelings of the child who has been repeatedly sexually abused in the most perverted way. It's terrifying to imagine the grief and horror her parents must have felt, locked up miles away, clueless about where their children were. They sat in prison under fabricated charges from anti-cult agents, completely helpless to find and protect their children.
I am a mom. I have 2 kids, also a boy and a girl. And when I was reading this story, I had to take breaks to gather myself because it tore me apart inside. I kept thinking about that mother. She's just like me, an ordinary person. Their family is just like ours. What was done to them is probably the worst thing I can imagine happening to anyone.
It's just completely... As a parent, I can't even imagine the helplessness of those parents because when our little girls are sick or just feeling off, we do everything we can to ease their suffering because it breaks our hearts. And to picture them in a situation 1,000 times worse than anything they've ever experienced, and to be unable to help, it just crushes me. The very thought that this isn't the only case, that there are millions of stories like this.
You're trapped somewhere, unable to do anything, and those kids are left at the mercy of this evil. It is insane.
How can anyone even do this? How can we allow someone to point a finger just because you're seen as inconvenient for some reasons? And in the name of protecting your children, they cause this kind of harm to them. We call this the 21st century, a time of societal progress.
When I first heard this story, I was overwhelmed with fear. Fear for my own children. Because I understand that if we, as a society, allow something this horrific to happen to even one child on this planet, I can never be sure that the same thing won't happen to my child. And honestly, I also felt a growing anger, an anger toward all of us as adults. How can we let this happen? How can we let our children suffer like this? And as has already been said, these are not isolated cases. We're talking about millions of children, millions of shattered lives. Let's not deceive ourselves. We all know these things are happening. And if anyone still has doubts, then let them go talk to some of these people, visit these places. Let them buy a child, not to abuse them, but to talk to them as a human being and understand what these children go through. And I have zero illusions that the story described everything they went through. I believe the reality is far more horrifying.
The way the story began, I see these signs happening here too, in both Slovakia and the Czech Republic. As I finished reading the article and learned the full story of those children and their family, I realized that we live in a democratic country where democratic rights are upheld, or rather they should be upheld. And if we hold on to those rights, we not only have the right, but a duty to speak up when something like this starts happening here in our own countries. So for me, this was a big challenge, to dig deeper and find out more.
Yes, recently we've had to study cases like this because when you are in a situation like ours, you try to understand what's happening. And Now we see that it all follows a certain pattern. We know what events lead up to it and that it has its phases. We can see that this same scenario, as you mentioned, is currently unfolding in Slovakia. I read various comments on Facebook and engaged in discussions with people who write things like, "Don't be ridiculous, no one is taking your kids away, we live in a democratic country." But just the fact that we're even talking about this is significant. We understand that these are not just random, unrelated events, it's organized activity. We realize that if this isn't stopped in time, it could become our reality.
Just think about how well the anti-cultists have this planned. They choose a group of innocent people to go after. We could ask, why don't they target large religious organizations? Why do they target Jehovah's Witnesses or yogis? They target people who have no one to stand up for them. They choose people without influential connections or billions in the bank. And once they've taken down one group, it gets easier with the next. Because now other groups start feeling afraid. And out of fear, they submit. And that's exactly how we end up losing democracy. One morning, we wake up living under totalitarian rule.
Wait, but how did we end up talking about totalitarianism?
They first suppress a smaller group of people. And by doing that, they find a way to suppress anyone inconvenient. So, it won't just be a Latra. They'll go after a larger group, the whole society, politicians, a party, including all its voters. And once they bite off a large enough piece, two large camps will emerge. They'll keep fueling the fire, pushing people toward aggression and fear until it breaks out into a civil war. You can already hear voices like that. And there have even been shootings. Complete chaos will follow. And people, devastated by this fighting with each other, will welcome with open arms anyone who promises to bring order to that chaos. So, civil war is just a step toward global totalitarianism.
But how could they succeed in a democratic country?
And this is precisely where the danger lies, because they use democratic tools to destroy democracy. And since they do it this way, we often don't even detect them from the start. Often, we only notice when there are already consequences from their actions, or if we know how they operate. Which is why I think it's important to take a close look. So, at the beginning, they build a network of contacts, recruiting new agents willing to do their dirty work. They recruit from key places they need. This includes journalists, politicians, and representatives of state institutions. First, they use journalists to launch a very negative, discrediting campaign against the group, or even an individual, that the anti-cultists want to eliminate or suppress. In the public space, they create an image of this group, portraying it as, I don't know, some kind of demonic group, a very dangerous one. Then they take this image and approach politicians and law enforcement, demanding action to suppress the group.
But in a democracy, it works this way. First, an offense is committed. It gets investigated, maybe even goes to court. After that comes a verdict. At that point, it's clear. And then the media can jump in, start reporting on it. They can then say, this group is dangerous, here's what happened. And from there, everything else unfolds.
It does make sense, doesn't it?
That's the logic of democracy, right? But here we've ended up in a situation where it's exactly the opposite. They've condemned us ahead of time, without evidence, without a trial, and they're already trying to suppress us. Where's the logic in that?
Ordinary, innocent people being persecuted. They're thrown in prison. The very citizens who should be protected by the Constitution and laws of the country. And when these people try to defend themselves, they have nowhere to turn. The media simply won't allow the other side to be heard. And the media is under pressure not to release truthful information. All these manipulations are happening right before our eyes.
Exactly. This is currently our reality in Slovakia as well. In 14 days, 240 articles were published. 240 articles with negative content about participants of the Allatra movement. I think any reasonable person has to see there is somebody's interest here. Please ask yourselves, do you really believe that the goal of this defamatory, slandering campaign is your protection? Do you believe the authors of this smear campaign are trying to protect you from this so-called dangerous cult?
And that's exactly the point. A media network has been set up. All they need is a target. Once they have one, they'll destroy it, whether it's us, a politician, the government, an organization, or any non-religious group, even a sports club. All it takes is for someone to become inconvenient to the anti-cultists. And you can clearly see the methods they use to eliminate them.
Do you know how much a headline or article like that costs in these kinds of media outlets? We do, because even if we offered money, they refused to publish articles that would allow you, citizens of Slovakia and the Czech Republic, to hear the other side of the story. This mechanism has been used so many times before, because, as you said, if a person recognizes it, it becomes fully visible. Then you can clearly see where and when it's happening. They claim they're there for the people, to protect people. For heaven's sake, have you seen the Impact film? Have you seen the people who went through their hands? These people are left permanently physically and psychologically crippled or even dead. What they are doing is actually mocking all of us, mocking people and democracy itself. It's terrible, but these people enjoy how they ruin human lives, indulging in their sense of power and victory. But right now, this is a kind of test. They're testing whether we're now so dulled that they can implement this mechanism, this plan, even in a democratic country like Slovakia.
And the most bizarre thing is that some of these investigative journalists claim that the anti-cult movement doesn't even exist. So I'm really curious. What have they been digging into for the past 6 months? And where? Because in all this time, they haven't been able to figure out such a simple question. What is the anti-cult movement? A question you can easily answer with just a quick glance at the Czech Wikipedia.
And they say that Allatra supposedly invented this term.
I don't know whether to laugh or cry at this information, because there are many reputable experts, scientists, and sociologists of religious studies who, back in the early 1990s, were already warning about these anti-cult movements. They pointed out the dangers, especially those posed by the representatives of these movements, who, under the guise of a noble effort to protect victims of cults, use their infamous deprogramming techniques to kidnap alleged cult members from these groups against their will. They physically tortured them, psychologically abused them, and even sexually exploited them in an attempt to drive out the so-called cult devil, or whatever they believed they were exorcising.
And none of them even asked for help, right?
Exactly. And for this so-called rescue work, they were paid extremely well by frightened family members who believed they were rescuing cult victims.
It's a business plan.
A business plan. And on the other hand, why do we even know all this? It's precisely because many anti-cultists involved in this deprogramming faced trials, and they lost them. For human rights violations, for abuse, and for spreading slander. And it's not just individuals. Entire organizations went bankrupt. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom even commented on Dvorkin, head of the Russian anti-cult association, Rasiers, which operates under the Russian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. In their reports from 2020 and 2023. And everything I'm telling you now is just the tip of the iceberg. You could find all this about the anti-cultists with just one evening of Googling. So, thanks to the splendid work of these so-called investigative journalists, we can declare that investigative journalism is dead.
It doesn't matter whether they've set up as razziers in Russia or as fekris in France. The anti-cultists don't care about these countries at all. They're just using them to achieve far greater ambitions, achieving global totalitarian control. And we can look at what it's like in a country where they've already succeeded in seizing total control. For example, Russia. There, it's especially clear how they can manipulate political leaders. Remember when the Russian president once spoke about wanting to join NATO? About the path of democracy. And what's his rhetoric now? What changed and who was behind this shift? When he first came to power, he talked about mutual equality and freedom of religion. Then came razziers, led by Dvorkin and Novopashin, and Putin forgot what he'd once said and adopted their rhetoric. Anti-cultists took key positions and proposed that the Russian Orthodox Church become the sole dominant religion in Russia. And that's how they bought it, the Russian Orthodox Church, by promising it would be the sole religion in the country. Good priests and those who opposed them were simply removed. Soon, it'll look like it did under the Tsar's rule, when a person could be sent to the galleys just for failing to cross themselves when passing a church.
And do you think people are living well there? When they can be thrown in prison for the slightest thing, even for liking the wrong post. In Russia, they've already succeeded. But that's not enough for the anti-cultists. Now look at what's happening in Ukraine. They've infiltrated the government there, and because of that, they've gained the power to suppress innocent people, not just Alatra. There are many other groups. But they go further. They go to other countries in Europe and the US. Yet their rhetoric, and the mechanisms they use remain the same. So if we understand how they did it in one country, we can recognize from their rhetoric when they're becoming active in another. And what are we seeing now in Slovakia?
Exactly the same thing.
I don't know if people realize it, but this is about the future of the entire democratic world. If the anti-cultists manage to get Slovakia into their grip, the rest of Europe will follow. Because if they succeed in setting a precedent by destabilizing a democratic state, a member of the European Union, then they'll be able to expand their totalitarian reach across the rest of Europe. And I think you can imagine that this will affect everyone, especially our children. What do you think the anti-cultists will do with them once nothing stands in their way?
That's our problem. Too many people today think that this issue doesn't concern them at all. And that's a big problem.
Yes, exactly. And this is precisely on point. First, they went after Falun Gong. I didn't practice Falun Gong, so I stayed silent. Then they came for Jehovah's Witnesses. I kept quiet because I'm not a Jehovah's Witness. Now they're targeting Alatra. So you stay silent because you're not Alatra. But who will stand up for you then?
Well, we can already see what's happening here. We see how the Resear's Manual, which is essentially a guide to destabilizing democracy, is being implemented in practice. This manual is readily available. I'll read you one of the instructions from it. Disseminating information about members of labeled organizations with description of details such as names, home and work addresses, phone numbers, and creating photo and video materials, including their appearance and place of residence, and publishing them in a defamatory context. So in practice, we see how personal data about participants of Alatra International Public Movement and participants of the Creative Society Project is being collected illegally.
Writing quite actively on social media. Send me information. Outright calls for people to report others.
Who is this girl? If you know, let me know.
That's exactly according to the handbook. In the past, it used to be on posters, and now it's moved into the online space. It's truly a guide for undermining democracy. There are more instructions there, and you can look it up. We can actually see that it's already happening here. But there are also honest journalists, so we can appeal to them as well. So how about it, honest journalists? Honest bloggers, you have a conscience too, don't you? You have children, right? By staying silent, you're taking away the future of these children. By staying silent, you're betraying your children. You're betraying all children. Why don't you publish factual, evidence-based articles?
They're scared because it's so clear. You don't even have to directly support Alatra. It's enough to start pointing out the manipulations, the absolute obscenities and perversions that are happening, and they will swarm you like locusts, tearing you apart. Of course, they're scared. They don't want to be associated with an alleged cult or an alleged security threat.
Many people commented under these manipulative posts, saying that it seemed strange to them that the same thing was being repeated over and over, only to immediately be met with responses like, "Oh, so you're one of them, you're one of those cultists." We're seeing this in everyday life, how this mechanism works to intimidate people, to prevent them from speaking out or pointing out that something here is exaggerated.
And to make sure that no one else dares to join in.
So instead of journalistic ethics, you've put the orders of criminals above all else. You're creating conditions for them to commit genocide. And in democratic countries at that, where laws and human rights are supposed to be upheld. Just think about what they've pressured you into. You'll break democratic laws, or we'll say you're a cult member and ruin your business. And instead of going to the prosecutor's office and shouting about it, you obey? I think there are really only a few people doing this. It can't be a large group because it's like with wolves. There are just two, one on one end, the other on the other, and they make a lot of noise. When you don't know about them, you think it's a large group, but
in fact, they're just great manipulators, and they're more like two rats in a glass jar who will eventually eat each other.
It takes only one or two people per city.
And that's very interesting because, on the one hand, the anti-cultists need a sufficient number of their agents to achieve their goals. But on the other hand, not too many. Because otherwise, they start fighting each other. They make a lot of noise, drawing attention to themselves, and they pull dirt on each other.
Even now, we see moments when they start targeting one another.
When a student tries to replace his teacher,
let's give it a little more time and...
And what about the police, lawyers, prosecutors, or politicians? Do you like that the media slander your work? Do you want those with a conscience to be replaced by those who are morally bankrupt? If you don't speak up, they'll either break you or replace you. Why did you enter public service? Are you going to wait until things get as bad as they are in Russia? When you'll be arresting grandmothers for reading the Bible? Or until you start imprisoning innocent parents and destroying happy families, leaving their children sold into sexual slavery so these modern-day Nazis can gorge themselves and hold their conferences? Then these monsters will write nice things about you. Is this what you want? Why aren't you defending people's rights, especially those in our countries? You see how the media and certain individuals are publicly breaking the law. You know the law. When a Nazi stands against people, you are obliged to protect them. A Nazi claims that some are not humans. But if you comply, then what are you? Nazis too. It's terrifying when Nazis are in power. Not all, but those few who influence the course of events. And the collaborators who allow these Nazis to terrorize their own people. Or will you join those who are already fighting back in time? Because honest lawyers, prosecutors, and police officers have already begun to take action. Cases are being brought against the anti-cultists. Calls for accountability are being made, though not yet on a large scale, and there's a lot of work to be done. But no one will escape justice. You can count on it. This process has reached a point of no return. So, whose side are you on? Are you with the people? Or does your silence put you on the side of these Nazis?
Today, you've heard about the horrifying experiences of people who have faced the harsh actions of anti-cultists, intimidation, media attacks, labeling us as terrorists and dangerous maniacs, and warning people to stay away from us. Then law enforcement comes to people's homes, beats them, and humiliates them in front of their children. Can you imagine the terror felt by those who have been subjected to this violence? When people go through this kind of psychological and physical suffering, they're just grateful to have survived. It makes them realize that human rights are nothing more than words written in the Constitution, because in reality, no one came to their defense. You understand that you're doing nothing wrong and following the law, yet the law is not on your side. This creates an immense sense of helplessness. Such people no longer feel safe in this world and live in constant fear that someone may come for them again. If those who experienced these events had spoken up about what happened, there may not have been so many victims. The world would have known about it sooner, and we could have stopped them. Representatives of Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Scientologists, and others are sitting in silence, too afraid to speak out. I understand that you're scared, that you dread they will come for you again. But today, there are laws and UN resolutions. Many people have seen what happened to you and to us, but we must start speaking up. We need to spark a wave of truth so that others who endured this horror can gather the courage to share their stories. They must tell everyone about it. Many good people have suffered for decades, but now we can become the ones who stop this for good, so that no more children will suffer like those we've spoken about today. There are also honest police officers and prosecutors. There's plenty of evidence being studied, and they have started taking action. Legal cases are being brought against anti-cultists, for instance, against FACRIS. This process has reached such a level where it can no longer be stopped. Some are trying to cooperate, confess, and secure mitigating circumstances for themselves. Many of them hope for some leniency to avoid being tied to articles about terrorism, genocide, and crimes against humanity that hang over every one of them. These are the people involved in anti-cultism. They all are connected to Nazism.
Endured genocide for 10 years. We know what it's like. We went through it willingly so others wouldn't have to suffer. You are scared and say that your religion doesn't allow you to cooperate with others, or that God will take care of it. But be honest. You're so scared that you fear these Nazis. And we're telling you now, stop being afraid. They are already condemned. The world is starting to learn more about them every day. Now is your time to expose these maniacs. They must be held accountable for your suffering. We understand that millions of people will come forward with their testimonies and stories, and we will hear many traumatizing accounts. We will have to go through this process. Yes, it will not be that easy. It will be painful to discover how much suffering and anguish innocent people have endured. You, normal citizens, normal people, have become victims, and you see yourselves as such. And you are sitting in a corner and hiding. Our hearts break for the children who've been traumatized, who cannot proudly go to school and cannot freely say that their parents are Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientologists, Jews, Muslims, or Orthodox Christians, because others don't see them as equals. They don't perceive them as human beings. Yet, there is no difference between any of us. This is stated in the law, and when it is in the law, it will be so.